Hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to have you here as we explore Mega Goal 2.1. Today, we're focusing on Unit 4, the art of advertising. We'll be diving into the fascinating world of form, meaning, and function in advertising. Over the next few slides, we'll look at how advertisements communicate messages, create impact, and serve their purposes effectively. I'm looking forward to guiding you through this insightful journey. Let's get started. Today, we'll focus on how to distinguish between different uses of words like one and ones. It's important to understand how to use possessive adjectives and pronouns correctly to show ownership clearly. We'll also cover how to use quantifiers like to and enough accurately in various contexts. Moving on, we'll look at the imperative form, which is essential for giving commands and instructions confidently. Lastly, we'll practice using demonstrative pronouns to point out specific things and learn how to ask whose in questions to find out who owns something. These key points are crucial for improving your clarity and precision in English. Ahora vamos a hablar sobre cómo usamos los demonstrativos en inglés. Primero, cuando nos referimos a sustantivos plurales que están ligados, usamos those. Por ejemplo, si estás señalando varias cosas que están a una distancia, dirías those books o those cars. Es una forma de indicar que las cosas no están cerca de nosotros. Luego, si los sustantivos plurales están cerca, usamos these. Así que si tienes varias cosas a tu lado o frente a ti, dirías these pens o these chairs. Es una forma de mostrar cercanía y que las cosas están próximas. Ahora en cuanto a los sustantivos singulares que están ligados, utilizamos that. Por ejemplo, that house o that mountain. Es útil cuando quieres señalar algo que está a una distancia considerable. Por último, para los sustantivos singulares que están cerca, usamos this. Como en this apple o this idea. En este caso, la idea es que la cosa está cerca en nuestro entorno inmediato. En resumen, los demonstrativos nos ayudan a señalar y distinguir objetos o ideas en relación a su distancia y cantidad. Son muy útiles para clarificar a qué o a quién nos referimos en diferentes contextos. Esto se conecta con la temática general del uso correcto del inglés, donde la precisión en la referencia es clave para una comunicación efectiva. Now let's look at these words. Those, great, those, that, these, this. Each of these words is used to point to something specific, and in this case, they are referring to Riem's drawing pins. The blank space here is where we would put the correct demonstrative pronoun to complete the sentence. So, for example, if we want to say, those are Riem's drawing pins, we would fill in the blank with those. This slide helps us understand how we use different words to indicate which objects we are talking about, especially when identifying things like Riem's drawing pins. It's a good way to practice recognizing the right demonstrative word depending on the context. This slide is all about understanding some keywords we use when talking about things around us. Great, those, that, these, this, they might seem simple, but they help us point to specific objects or people. For example, when I say this, I'm referring to something close to me, while that might point to something farther away. Those and these are plurals, referring to multiple objects, either near or far. And the word this, in particular, is very useful when I want to emphasize a specific item. Now look at the sentence on the slide. Is my mum's favorite a bag? The blank should be filled with this, because I'm talking about a bag that is close to me or that I want to highlight. This simple example shows how these words help us communicate clearly about what we're talking about. They're essential, especially when describing things around us or pointing things out. So, as we continue, keep in mind how these words help us connect with our audience and make our descriptions more precise. Now let's look at some of these demonstrative words, these, those, that, and this. These words are really useful because they help us point out specific things. For example, when I say, these apples, I'm referring to apples that are close to me or that I've just mentioned. Those apples, on the other hand, would refer to apples that are farther away or previously mentioned. That and this are also used to specify objects, but this typically points to something nearby or something I want to emphasize right now, while that refers to something a bit farther away or less immediate. In the sentence on the slide, I've left a blank space before are the apples I picked yesterday. The idea here is that the correct demonstrative word should match the context. So, if these apples are close to me, I would say, "These are the apples I picked yesterday." If they were farther away, I might say, "Those are the apples I picked yesterday." So, understanding when to use each word helps us communicate more clearly and precisely, especially when we're talking about objects around us or things we've just mentioned. Remember, these words are all about pointing out, making your descriptions more specific, and your conversations more effective. That great, those that these this, is the key ring I got from my sister. What I want to highlight here is how small objects, like a key ring, can carry a lot of meaning. This particular key ring is more than just a holder for keys. It's a symbol of connection and memory. You see, sometimes, it's the simple things, like this key ring, that remind us of loved ones and special moments. And in the context of today's presentation, it emphasizes how everyday objects can have a significant emotional value, tying into our overall theme of personal connections and meaningful possessions. So, when I look at this, I'm reminded of the importance of the small things that make our lives richer and more connected. All right, let's go through some important classroom rules to help us have a smooth and respectful environment. First, please remember to speak clearly and confidently when it's your turn. However, it's equally important not to interrupt others when they are speaking. We should listen carefully to what our classmates and teachers are saying. When you want to ask a question or contribute, raise your hand instead of calling out. This helps maintain order and shows respect for everyone's turn. When you are asked to sit down, please do so promptly and sit quietly. Also, make sure not to bring unnecessary items that could distract others, and avoid wearing hats or caps during lessons to stay focused and respectful. If you need to use your phone, put it away before the teacher asks you to do so. Don't forget. Remember to listen attentively and raise your hand if you want to speak or ask a question. Be respectful to your classmates and teachers and listen to what they say. But don't forget to be polite and kind, and avoid interrupting or talking out of turn. Finally, always remember to speak English. This helps us practice and improve together as a class. So, let's follow these simple rules to make our classroom a better place for everyone. Now let's look at how we show that something belongs to somebody. When we want to indicate possession, we use words like my, your, his, her, its, our, or their. These words are called possessive adjectives. Remember, they must always be followed by a noun to complete the idea. For example, if I say her book, her shows possession and book is the noun that tells us what belongs to her. So, whenever you're expressing ownership or belonging, just remember to use the appropriate possessive word followed by the noun. This is a simple but important way to make your meaning clear when talking about who owns what. They usually come at the end of a sentence. This is where you'll often see possessive pronouns, used instead of repeating the same noun, phrase over and over. Using possessive pronouns like my, your, his, her, its, our, or their helps keep your writing clear and concise. It also makes your sentences smoother and easier to follow. By avoiding repetition, you're making your message more natural and engaging for the reader or listener. So remember, when you're summarizing or referring back to something already mentioned, consider using a possessive pronoun to streamline your sentence and maintain clarity. Let's take a look at some possessive pronouns and how we use them. On this slide, you'll see words like theirs, mine, hers, their, my, and her. These words show ownership or belonging. Now, when we ask the question, whose jacket is it? We're trying to find out who the owner is. The answer depends on the context and the pronoun we choose. For example, if the jacket belongs to me, we say, it is my jacket. If it belongs to her, we say, it is her jacket. Notice how the pronoun changes depending on who owns the item. These small words are essential for clear communication about possession. As we go through this, remember that choosing the correct pronoun helps us avoid confusion and makes our sentences more precise. This concept ties back to our overall theme of mastering pronouns for better language skills. So here we have some possessive words: theirs, mine, hers, their, my, and her. These are all used to show ownership or belonging. For example, theirs refers to something that belongs to them, mine to something I own, and hers to something that belongs to her. Similarly, their is used to describe something that belongs to them collectively. My is for something I own, and her describes something that belongs to her. Now let's look at the question, whose rucksack is it? This is an example of asking about possession. The answer would be, it is, followed by the possessive word that matches the owner. For instance, if it belongs to me, I'd say, it is my rucksack. If it belongs to her, I'd say, it is her rucksack. So the key point here is understanding which possessive word to use based on who owns the item. Remember, these words help us clarify ownership in everyday conversations. This connects to the overall theme of mastering language and communication, making sure we can express ourselves accurately and clearly. All right, let's take a look at these pronouns and possessive words. We have theirs, mine, hers, their, my, and her. These are all used to show ownership or possession. For example, theirs refers to something that belongs to them, mine to something I own, and hers to something that belongs to her. Now, when we ask, whose ball is it? We're trying to figure out who the owner is. The answer depends on the context, but in this case, we say, it is, and then we can fill in with the right possessive. For example, if the ball belongs to me, I would say, it is mine. If it belongs to her, I would say, it is hers. If it's theirs, I say, it is theirs. The key point here is understanding that these words help us clarify ownership in a conversation. Remember that my and mine are used when talking about things I own, while her, hers, their, and theirs are used for others' possessions. So when you hear, whose ball is it? Think about who owns the ball, and then choose the correct possessive word to complete the sentence. This helps us communicate clearly and avoid confusion about who owns what. All right, let's look at these possessive pronouns and the way we ask about ownership. Here, we have words like theirs, his, yours, their, his again, and your. These are all used to show who something belongs to. When we ask, is it a bottle? We can follow that with a possessive pronoun to clarify whose bottle we're talking about. For example, if I want to ask if the bottle belongs to me, I might say, is it mine? And when someone responds, yes, it is mine, they're confirming that the bottle belongs to them. The key takeaway here is understanding how to use these possessive pronouns correctly in questions and answers about ownership. It's a simple but important part of clear communication, especially when talking about different people's belongings. This connects to our overall theme of mastering basic grammar to express ourselves accurately and confidently in English. This slide is about a very useful question word we use when we're trying to find out who owns something or who has a particular item. It's a simple yet powerful word that helps us clarify ownership or possession. When you want to ask, for example, who owns this book? Or who has the keys? You use this question word. It's especially helpful in conversations where identifying ownership is important. Remember, using the right question word makes your questions clear and precise, which is essential in effective communication. This concept ties into the overall theme of mastering question words to improve your language skills and ensure your questions are both accurate and natural. Now let's look at this slide about ownership and possession, which is fundamental when we talk about using the verb to be with nouns. First, we have called's car. You see the structure here. It's called's followed by the noun car. When we say it's, we are asking or stating who owns the car. So the question is, whose car is it? And the answer is called. Next, we have Yasser's glasses. Notice that glasses is plural, so we say their, which is short for they are. The question again is, whose glasses are they? And the answer is Yasser. This pattern helps us practice how to ask and answer about ownership clearly. Finally, we see Salem's book. Similar to the first example, it's it, followed by the blank indicating the need to fill in the correct form. The question is, whose book is it? And the answer is Salem. This slide emphasizes understanding possession using the whose question and how to respond with its or their, depending on whether the noun is singular or plural. Remember, mastering this will help you communicate clearly about who owns what, which is a key part of everyday conversations. Now, let's talk about using one with a singular countable noun, or ONES with a plural countable noun. These words are really useful tools in language because they help us avoid repeating the same nouns over and over again. For example, instead of saying the book multiple times, I can say one when referring to a single item, or ONES when talking about multiple items. It keeps our sentences clear and concise. Using one or ONES also makes our speech more natural and less redundant. It's a handy way to refer back to nouns we've already mentioned without sounding repetitive. This concept ties into the overall theme of effective communication, being clear, precise, and efficient with our words. Remember, choosing the right form depends on whether you're talking about one thing or many. So, keep this in mind as you practice your speaking and writing skills. Let's take a closer look at some important vocabulary related to quantity and objects. First, we have the word singular, which means one. For example, when I say one, I am referring to a single item. The word ones refers to multiple items, but still considered as individual units. Moving on, we see the term plural, which is used when talking about more than one of something. The plural form of one can be ones. It's essential to understand these distinctions because they help us communicate clearly about quantities. Now let's look at some practical examples. I asked for a glass, but they did not have. Here, you might want to say one if you're referring to a single glass. Next, I broke my glasses, so I will have to buy some new. In this case, the blank could be filled with ones if we're talking about new pairs of glasses or glasses if referring to new drinking glasses. Then I like those shoes, but let's buy these. You might fill in the blank with shoes, indicating specific shoes you're choosing. Finally, my car is the red. Here, you could say one if you're emphasizing a particular vehicle or simply car. But in this context, it's about identifying the specific car, the red one. Overall, understanding when to use singular, one, or plural ones helps us communicate precisely what we mean, especially when discussing objects and quantities. Today, I want to talk about how we use the words enough and to express different degrees of sufficiency. When we say enough, we're talking about something that is sufficient for a particular need or purpose. For example, if I say, we have enough time, it means we have just the right amount of time to do what we need to do. It's a positive way to indicate adequacy. We typically use enough with adjectives or adverbs, and it often comes after the adjective. For instance, big enough, fast enough, or early enough. It helps us communicate that something meets the necessary criteria without being excessive. Now moving on to to. We use to mean more than what is necessary or desirable. When I say too much or too little, I'm indicating that something exceeds or falls short of what is needed. For example, it's too hot means it's hotter than comfortable or acceptable. Or she is too busy, which suggests she has more on her plate than she can handle. When using to with adjectives, we place it directly before the adjective, like in too loud, too expensive, or too difficult. The key point is that to emphasizes excessiveness, which often leads to a problem or a need to adjust. Understanding these differences helps us communicate more precisely about quantities and degrees. Whether we're describing adequacy with enough or expressing excess or deficiency with to, choosing the right word helps us convey our message clearly and effectively in any context. All right, let's look at these two common expressions. When I say enough, as in I'm not old enough to drive a car, I mean that I haven't reached the age required to be legally allowed to drive. It's about meeting a minimum age or requirement. On the other hand, when I say too young, like in I'm too young to drive a car, I'm emphasizing that I am younger than the age considered appropriate or safe for driving. Notice how both expressions relate to age, but they focus on different points. Enough highlights meeting the minimum standard, while too young emphasizes being below that standard. These are important because they help us communicate clearly about age restrictions and eligibility, which is a common topic in many situations, especially when discussing rules or laws. So, in the larger context of this presentation, understanding these expressions helps us better describe and explain situations related to age, rules, and limitations. It's a simple but essential part of clear communication. Now, let's look at some common ways to express limits or degrees of ability. First, we have the word enough. For example, if I say, "He isn't strong enough to lift the box," it means his strength is not sufficient to do that task. The key point here is that enough is used to show that something meets or does not meet a necessary threshold. Next, we have the word too. For instance, he is too weak to lift the box. This indicates that his weakness exceeds what is acceptable or needed for the task, making it impossible for him to lift the box. The important thing to remember is that too often emphasizes excess, too much of a certain trait, like weakness in this case. Both of these expressions help us clarify whether someone has the necessary strength or ability, which ties into our overall theme of describing capacities and limitations clearly and accurately in English. So let's look at these two examples to understand how we use enough and too in relation to height and ability. In the first sentence, he isn't tall enough to play basketball. The word enough indicates that his height does not reach the necessary level for playing basketball. It highlights a deficiency or a limit. In contrast, the second sentence, he is too short to play basketball, uses too to emphasize that his height is excessive in the negative sense, meaning he's shorter than what is needed, and this prevents him from playing. The key point here is that enough is used to show sufficiency when someone or something meets the required level. Too, on the other hand, signals excess, either too much or too little, often resulting in a negative outcome. Understanding these differences helps us describe situations more precisely, especially when talking about abilities, limitations, or comparisons, which ties back into our overall theme of expressing degrees and conditions accurately. All right, so let's look at this slide. When I say enough, I'm referring to the level of difficulty I experience with the exam. For example, I might say, "The exam is too difficult for me," meaning it's more challenging than I can comfortably handle. On the other hand, if I want to express that the exam isn't easy at all, I could say, "The exam isn't easy enough for me." This highlights that I find it quite tough, and perhaps I need to put in more effort or seek additional support. The key point here is understanding how we describe the difficulty of an exam, whether it's too difficult or not easy enough. These phrases help us communicate our struggles or challenges clearly. Connecting this to the overall theme, it's important to recognize how we express our perceptions of difficulty, as it impacts how we approach studying and preparing for exams. So, being able to articulate whether something is too or not enough helps us better understand our own learning experiences. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. From the Holy Quran, we see that it emphasizes the importance of guidance and moral conduct. It teaches us that the Quran is a clear guide for those who seek righteousness and want to lead a balanced, meaningful life. The key points here are the divine origin of the Quran and its role as a source of moral and spiritual guidance. It reminds us that the message is universal and timeless, meant to connect us with our Creator and help us navigate life's challenges with wisdom and compassion. This ties into our overall theme of understanding the spiritual foundation of our values and how sacred texts continue to inspire ethical living today. All right, now let's take a look at your workbook on page 255, specifically Exercise L. This is a great opportunity to apply what we've discussed today. When working through this exercise, focus on the key points we've covered, but also try to connect them to the bigger picture. Remember, the goal is not just to complete the task, but to deepen your understanding of how these concepts fit together. Take your time, think critically, and don't hesitate to revisit the main ideas if you need a refresher. Doing this homework will reinforce your learning and help you see how these skills translate into real-world situations. So, give it your best shot, and we'll review it together next time. Thanks, I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here today. I hope you found the presentation insightful and useful. Remember, the key points we discussed, whether it's the importance of innovation, collaboration, or continuous learning, are all vital to achieving success. Keep these ideas in mind as you move forward, and don't hesitate to apply them in your own work. Thank you again for your attention and engagement. It's been great sharing this journey with you, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors.